Number 2 meets number 3 this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. local time in the Pacific Time Zone, as the Ohio State Buckeyes travel to Eugene, Oregon to take on the Oregon Ducks. Both of these teams were the preseason favorites to win the Big Ten. Ohio State was the favorite. Oregon was that preseason silver medalist, just closely trailing the Ohio State Buckeyes. Both of these teams are 5-0, 2-0 in Big Ten Conference play. Their head coaches are some of the best in the business. I think top 10. I think that Ryan Day right now is competing for being the best head coach nationally. And I think if you give Lanning a few more years, he will also be competing for that honor, potentially. These staffs are competent. Actually, competent is too soft of a word to describe them. They are pioneers. They are innovators. They are elite. They are tough. They are, well, I already said innovative, so I can't say that again. Some of them are geniuses. Some of the staffers that reside in Eugene and Columbus with these programs are truly geniuses. Very forward-thinking. They know when to be progressive, when to be conservative with the football. They're adaptive. They're fluid, but not so fluid that they don't have an identity. They're firm in their convictions. And these rosters are very talented. Both are made up with more than 50% of blue-chip players. Both have a plethora of 5 stars and 4 stars. But more importantly than that, circle back to the staffs who put these players in a position to win, who use the talents that these players have to further develop them and to help them explode out into the national scene. You got Jordan James, you got Noah Whittington for Oregon in the running back room, and Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson for Ohio State's running back room. These receiver cores with Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, Brandon Innes for Ohio State, Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, and many others, Jurion Dickey, for example, for Oregon's wide receiver room. These offensive lines are tough. They are big. They are physical. Had some injury concerns early on, but right now I think they are at full strength there. And as for the defense, you got Jabbar Muhammad, Derek Harmon, you have Bryce Betcher, just some star players on Oregon's defense, and Ohio State's defense right now is the best defense in the country. Either that or maybe Iowa or Penn State, but they're number 1 in scoring defense, and Tyleik Williams is healthy. You have Jack Sawyer paired with him on the defensive line, and of course Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock are some of the best DBs in all of football. Needless to say, enough of the talk. Let's get into previewing this game. Let me give my prediction for you at the end of this video. And there are several pathways, I think, for both of these teams to win because they're both very good. However, I do want to tell you that I think there is only one outcome and one team who has the potential to blow out the other. And that ties in with my prediction. So you won't want to miss whatever I have to say on here. But before we get into this preview, prediction, analysis, and total breakdown of this game with several more videos to come circling these two teams, the matchups involved, and all the data that comes with the sample sizes and games played from these teams, I want you to please support the channel by subscribing, by clicking the notification bell, by commenting your prediction. Just simple. All it takes is 5 characters. For example, 27-23 Oregon or 31-21 Ohio State. Only takes 5 characters for the score and a few more for the team who you think is going to win. Just type that in the comment section below. Helps us boost engagement, which helps us to get more viewers and more subscribers. And you can also do that again by liking the video, subscribing, hitting the bell. Share this video around with other college football fans you know, as by being a college football fan, they will enjoy this show. We pride ourselves on being the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and we'd also appreciate your support via the Patreon page or the merchandise store, which you can find via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But your viewership and watching this video all the way through and engaging, That means a lot to me as is, and that's the biggest part of this channel's success. So thank you very much for all that you do. And last but not least, join the Discord server. It's totally free via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. A lot of great conversations that happen in that Discord server. And I'm active in it, so you'll get to talk with me in the Discord server about college football and many other passionate college football fans. But you look at this game here, and from a bird's eye view, you think that it's on the road, it's a top 5 matchup, Ohio State is favored by 3.5, but why are they favored by 3.5? You may think that. And the reason they're favored by 3.5 is A, they have been the more impressive team so far this season, just objectively. You look at points per play margin, which we'll get to in a few seconds, a minute here. You look at FPI, you look at S&P Plus, you look at power ratings, you look at talent, you look at returning production. All of that goes in Ohio State's favor. And Oregon is joining a new conference. So even with the initial reaction of Oregon is this physical team who's done well in recent games, not so much game 1 or game 2 necessarily, at stopping the run, running the football, being solid in the trenches against an Ohio State team who's not known for that. Well, that's why the Buckeyes here are favored despite being on the road, is per S&P Plus, thank you, Bill Connolly, Ohio State's viewed as 30.1 points better than the average college football team. Meanwhile, Oregon's only viewed as about 24.7 points better than the average college football team. In FPI, Oregon is viewed as about 18.5 points better than the average college football team. Meanwhile, Ohio State is viewed as 27.7 points better than the average college football team. You take S&P Plus, where you round Ohio State is viewed as 30 points better than the average football team. Oregon's 25. You subtract 3 points from Ohio State or add 3 to Oregon, whatever you want to do, because Oregon gets an extra 3 points for being at home. That's what Vegas says is home field advantage is worth. You get Ohio State minus about 3, and that's what the line is right now about. It opened up at 3.5. It stayed at 3.5 per ESPN bet. There are other services where I see that it's at 4.5, 4 maybe. And it may rise or it may fall throughout the week, but I think it'll stay around there. Ohio State is viewed as the better team, not just because of preseason priors or all that they returned or the fact that Ryan Day is a more experienced head coach, all these different factors. It's also because of, you look at the dominance of these two teams, and Ohio State has been the more dominant team. I mean, think about it. What game was more impressive to you? Oregon beating Michigan State at home, or Ohio State beating Iowa at home? Both teams shot themselves in the foot repeatedly in the first half, only to come out and, whether it was in the second quarter for Oregon or the third quarter for Ohio State, come out and just wreck their opponent and gut them and leave their body bloodless before kicking them out of the stadium. I would say Ohio State over Iowa, 35-7 compared to Oregon's 31-10. At one point for Oregon, it was 31-0. And as for Ohio State, at one point, it was 35-0. They dominated their two opponents, but Iowa is the much better team than Michigan State. Power ratings will tell you that. The fact that Iowa has a elite defense, Michigan State does not. Their defense is good, but not elite. And Iowa also has at least a non-negotiable on offense in Caleb Johnson. Michigan State does not. Would tell you that. And what I saw in Ohio State was a team that was able to overcome an elite defense and an improved offense by Iowa. Ohio State on the season has a 0.569 points per play margin, which means when Ohio State runs a play, compared to when their average opponent they have faced runs a play, Ohio State scores 0.569 more points. That adds up pretty quickly, very quickly. It's why they've, well, blown out all of their opponents, and that pans out here in the points per play margin. For Oregon, that's not such the case, as especially against Boise State, little bit against Idaho, though Oregon statistically dominated that game and ended up winning by 10. And against Michigan State and UCLA, they didn't score a bunch of points either. They have not been as dominant. They have a 0.285 points per play margin. Speaking of which, they're behind Penn State in points per play margin, and they are also behind Penn State in S&P+. They're barely ahead of them in FPI. So Oregon and Penn State, currently by analytics, are viewed as closer together than either of those two teams are to Ohio State. I just wanted to lay that groundwork there because here at College Football with Sam, we like to dive into the deep end of the pool slowly because I think that's the appropriate way to do things. You got to look at the general view, the bird's eye view, because if you just dive into the specific details, and first things first, I talked to you about Jeremiah Smith and how he's making all these one-handed catches, or I talk about Jordan James and how he's really emerged, or the fact that Oregon did a much better job stopping Michigan State's offense than Ohio State did, for example, which is true, and I don't give you much context other than just those statistics, well, we can miss some things here. So it's good to start from a bird's eye view, look at the forest, and then we can dive further into the trees. And last but not least, as I said earlier, these two teams have faced similar strengths of schedule. Ohio State is the 109th strength of schedule right now. Oregon's the 94th. Even factoring that in, though, Oregon's top 10 in game control, 10th. Ohio State, though, is top 5. They're 3rd. And I think that for Ohio State in particular, they may actually be underrated here. I know Texas is higher. I think that's because of their win over Michigan and the fact that it was a flawless first half performance by them. Meanwhile, Ohio State had anything but a flawless first half against Iowa. But right now, I do think Ohio State is the best team in the country, and I won't shy away from that because I said that in a video reacting to the Iowa game and also on my Twitter, which follow my Twitter, if you would please, via the description. Oregon, I think, had a impressive second half performance against Michigan State and also an impressive second quarter performance after those 2 red zone picks by Dylan Gabriel and giving up a bad fourth down conversion. That was a bad play by the Oregon defense. They did a very good job of limiting Michigan State's offense and forcing a turnover of their own, stopping Michigan State, and also, in particular, shutting down K'Ron Lynch-Adams and Nate Carter, who did some damage to Ohio State in that game in East Lansing, where Ohio State won 38-7, and other matchups as well. So, I want to get into the critical matchup here. Start talking about the details. I think that for Ohio State, it is a must that they shut down Oregon's rushing offense. I think that even with Will Howard and the questions that surround his consistency, I think his upside's pretty high. But consistency and upside are two different things. Jalen Milroe of probably still this year, but also last year, is the perfect example of this. J.J. McCarthy in 2022 is the perfect example of this. At times, they looked like the best quarterback in the entire nation. But other times, they looked like, why are you on scholarship type quarterback? And when you average that out, well, that's your consistency, really. Not exactly, but consistency in the sense of how do you replicate your performance, especially your best performance, because that's what we care about. And Will Howard has thrown some passes that should have been picked. He's thrown some passes that have been picked. He has 3 interceptions, but he's also thrown some passes that were dropped by DBs because they haven't faced good DBs outside of Iowa. 1 out of 5 teams they've played have had good defensive backs. You look at, and that's in the aggregate, by the way. Michigan State's Charles Brantley's done very well this year. Just wanted to shout him out. But anyway, I think that despite that, because of Jeremiah Smith, because of Emeka Egbuka, because of the receivers they have, because of their offensive line, the fact that Will Howard can run and run often, and also the running backs that Ohio State has, I don't think that Ohio State's offense is going to be as easily shut down as Oregon's is. Oregon's offense it's not handicapped. It's not handicapped one bit, but comparing it to Ohio State's offense, they are more handicapped than Ohio State is. I'd substitute handicapped probably for being more limited, because Oregon's offense is very good, but Ohio State has a easier time throwing the ball deep. They have an easier time running the football. This is very clear. Even watching Ohio State versus Iowa, Ohio State in that second half, in the third quarter, and for their first drive of the game where they scored a touchdown, they looked more comfortable, more calm, more fluid, and like they were playing at a higher level compared to anything I've seen from Oregon this whole year against inferior defenses. Ohio State's offense is more versatile, it is more diverse, it has a higher upside, and it has a higher floor. It is a better offense than Oregon. It just is. For Oregon to win here, what they have to do is they have to run the ball. They have to limit Ohio State's possessions, and they have to test an Ohio State defense that may be inflated in defending the run. I don't think that they are inflated, but what I will say is it's pretty easy to stop one of Iowa's better rushing attacks in recent memory when you have no faith in Cade McNamara and his receivers to reliably get into scoring distance. That is something that is just true. And for Oregon, they have Tez Johnson, they have Trayshawn Holden, they have Dylan Gabriel, and if they can pick up yardage against Ohio State's secondary and make Jim Knowles change up his scheme and try harder to defend the pass, Oregon, with their offensive line being healthy and Jordan James, will be able to run the football. They will. Whether that's for 3 yards per clip and they have to convert some fourth downs to sustain drives like Michigan did last year, or whether it's 4, 5, 6 yards per clip and they're able to maybe pop some explosive runs against this Ohio State defense, they have to run the ball. And as for Ohio State, they have to stop Oregon from running the ball, because I don't think anyone outside of... I don't think anyone's stopping Ohio State's rushing attack. The only team I can think of right now who might be capable of that is Penn State, or Michigan if Michigan had a competent coaching staff. Those are the only teams. If you lined up this Ohio State rushing offense with their backs against defenses from last season, only Michigan and Texas, I would say, would have had the capability of slowing down this Ohio State rushing offense. Again, those defenses being from last year, to the point where they'd have to reliably throw the ball. And then Texas's secondary last year is terrible, so Ohio State would have no problem passing on them. Only a few defenses of not just this year, but of the past several years, I think can stop this Ohio State rushing attack. That's just my opinion. It's because of the running backs they have. So I don't think Oregon is going to be halting this Ohio State rushing attack. They may slow it down, but Ohio State at the same time with their defense probably does not need to score 40 points to win. They may not even have to score 30 points to win. So I think the critical matchup here is, can Ohio State's defense, led by Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Sonny Styles, Cody Simon, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Caleb Downs, Davison Igbinosun, who got the Silver Bullet of the Week, and Jordan Hancock, can they stop Jordan James, Noah Whittington, Johnny Cornelius, Josh Connerly Jr., Nishad Strother, Marcus Harper II, and Iapani Lololu? Can they slow them down? Can they potentially stop them cold in their tracks and just derail that Oregon rushing attack? Because again, as I mentioned, I don't think that Oregon will stop Ohio State's rushing offense. They could slow them down, but to stop versus slow down is a totally different story. Again, as I mentioned, 2023 Michigan, 2023 Texas, if their secondary somehow woke up, this year's Penn State, Maybe this year's Michigan, if they somehow had an offense and played an A-plus game on defense, doubtful. Maybe this year's Texas. I don't know. Their defense looks really good. But only a few teams of this season, last season, maybe 2022 Georgia, 2021 Georgia, a few teams of the past several seasons could stop this Ohio State rushing attack. Oregon's not one of them. Oregon at best can hope to slow down this rushing offense, and eventually the dam will break loose if they can't run the football. Because I don't think that Dylan Gabriel and his receivers, with what I have seen through 5 games, are going to be tearing up this Ohio State defense on their own. Ohio State's entire defense is a non-negotiable. They don't just have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 players who are non-negotiables. Every player on their defense, except for maybe their linebackers, and they're only 2 players out of the 11, are non-negotiables. So what Oregon needs to do is run the ball, limit possessions, mix in passes with their athletic and speedy receivers to keep Ohio State's defense honest. Honestly, what Oregon needs to do is what Iowa did, because they actually have the talent to execute that game plan to perfection, drive in between the 20s, get some touchdowns, guaranteed field goals, and that way Ohio State constantly has some pressure on themselves. The defense is trying to find its footing, and that's the path for Oregon to win. It's also the path for Ohio State to win if they can just stand up and shut down this Oregon rushing attack, which I think is ultimately the key to the game, is Oregon's rushing offense and how successful it will be. Looking at these offenses here in bigger detail, I would give Ohio State running back, I would give them receiver, I'd give them center, and I would give them guard. Keep an eye on Seth McLaughlin for Ohio State. He has done a very good job this season. However, this is something that people, I think, have been a little intellectually dishonest about. Seth McLaughlin's biggest struggles came on the road against Auburn and Michigan specifically, in non-Bama environments, in hostile environments, in high-pressure situations. Ohio State has not been in a high-pressure situation yet this season. They have not. Nice statistic from Bill Connolly. They've only had 13 explosive plays, 13, when their win probability has been in between 10 to 90%. A lot of Ohio State's shine has come in moments where they're basically a lock to win as is. In all of their games so far this season, I have had no doubts as to whether Ohio State's going to win the game or not. With Oregon, it's totally different. Against Boise State, there were times where I'm thinking, oh, they're going to lose, or maybe they'll win. And that was really the only game, but still a big one. And I think that there's just, these teams have 5 games played, but this is by far their toughest matchup they've faced yet. Autzen is going to be the loudest stadium that Ohio State has played in. And I would just look at Seth McLaughlin. I'm not going to predict that he's going to snap the ball over Will Howard's head maybe more than once or have more than one bad snap because he's played well so far this season. However, also Ohio State's offensive line this year is much better than Alabama's last year. Keep an eye on Seth McLaughlin because it's a loud environment. It just is. It's Autzen, constantly reaches 100 decibels even without 100,000 people. It's built to trap noise. Oregon's defense is the best defense that Ohio State has played so far this season on the road. It's much better than MSU's. It is going to be better than, I forget who Ohio State's road games are. Sorry, just not on the top of my head. Outside of Penn State, Oregon, Michigan State, it's going to be better than Northwestern's. It is a better defense, certainly, than Purdue's at home. It's not better than Iowa's, but again, that road environment with the crowd noise behind Oregon's defense, and Oregon may have better defensive line, particularly in stopping the run, than Iowa. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know for a fact Ashton Jeanty can run on anyone, so I don't hold that against Oregon for him running for 6-7 yards per carry on them. And Oregon's defense has gotten healthier, as has the whole team, since that game. But just pay attention to Seth McLaughlin. Pay attention to him. And also Will Howard, because I don't think Will Howard has played in an environment like this. Ohio State, though, I'd give them the edge on offense, period. Oregon, tight end and tackle, I would give to them. I know Josh Simmons has played well, but Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly Jr. have gotten better throughout the season after some initial struggles, and I would take their tackles right now. Quarterback is an area that's a total push. You look at Will Howard for Ohio State, and you look at Dylan Gabriel for Oregon. Dylan Gabriel's 1,449 passing yards. He's completing 77.8% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 168.9 passer rating. Will Howard has 1,248 passing yards, 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 178 flat passer rating. I would say, looking at these players, Howard also has 64 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Gabriel 71 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Both of these QBs are mobile. They're both veterans. Howard, I'd say, has the slightly higher ceiling, but I'd actually say he has a significantly lower floor, and I think that he is in the better offensive system right now. Because he has better receivers, a better interior O-line, a better running back. Only reason I wouldn't take Gabriel outright over Will Howard, if you put a gun to my head, I may actually take Will Howard here, is because he does look significantly improved. Like, he is throwing accurate balls. He's putting it on the money, to steal a phrase from Gus Johnson, in a way that he didn't at Kansas State. He does look better. And to back up what my beliefs are about these offenses, Oregon has ran for 822 yards and 9 touchdowns, only 4.6 yards per carry. They've passed for 1,471 yards, 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Ohio State has passed for 1,440 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, and they have ran for 1,111 yards at 6.2 yards per attempt. 16 rushing touchdowns, factoring in the remaining games and potentially appearing in Indy, which looks very likely, and playoff games. They will probably hit close to 40 rushing touchdowns this year, which is very, very impressive. I mean, watching their rushing offense reminds me of Michigan's rushing offense in 2022. Defensively isn't as close as offenses are. I think Ohio State's defense is clearly better. Bryce Betcher is a really good player for the Ducks at linebacker. Oregon on defense this season has 16 sacks, 4 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. Bryce Betcher has 3 passes defended and a pick and 32 total tackles. He leads the team in that category. And Justin Jacobs, Jeffrey Bassa, Devin Jackson. Oregon overall does have a good linebacker core. They do. However, I would take a look at Ohio State's defense as a whole and the fact that their defensive line is better. Ohio State this season has 17 sacks, 4 interceptions, 4 passes defended, 6 forced fumbles, and 5 fumble recoveries. And the fact that they have more NFL players on their defense, I think Jim Knowles is a top 5 defensive coordinator. Tosh Lupoy is someone who is questionable at Alabama as their DC, only was there for a year as their DC before getting a different job. And at Oregon, they have been known under Dan Lanning for being more of an offensive team than a defensive team. And I think while that may be changing this season, I don't know yet. And the reality is that Boise State was able to move the ball while having a pretty one-dimensional offense. UCLA, for example, did a better job moving the ball on Oregon than they did against Penn State, in my opinion. And I think that Ohio State's defense right now, I would put as a better unit overall than Penn State's. So a little bit of what-if comparisons because, of course, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon haven't all played each other, but some hypotheticals can be helpful here. And you look at some more statistics here, the fact that Oregon has defensively allowed 114 opponent rushing yards per game on average. Ohio State's only allowed 73.6. Ohio State only allows 2.3 rush yards per attempt. Oregon allows 3.9. In total defense, Oregon allows around 70 more yards. And in scoring defense, Oregon allows 17.8 points per game. Ohio State only allows 6.8. And Ohio State's average scoring margin, consequentially, is 39 points per game in their favor, while Oregon is only 20 points per game in their favor. So I think that Ohio State has the better defense here. And especially this is the case, in my opinion, in the secondary. Especially in the secondary. And also at defensive end. I've been more impressed by Oregon's defensive tackles and also by Ohio State's defensive tackles, at least starting defensive tackles, with Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams than I have with these pass rushers here. I don't think that Ohio State and Oregon's pass rushers are necessarily world class, as in generational or elite in a normal season. So far, this is anything but a normal season. However, they're pretty good, but the interior D-lines are even better. Oregon, though, has a lot of transfer guys in the secondary. Oregon's run defense has some questions. I think a large part of that is due to them facing Ashton Jeanty. In their passing defense, though, you see that Ohio State, they only allow 8.7 yards per completion, 5.5 opponent yards per pass attempt. Oregon actually leads Ohio State in yards per pass attempt. They do, honestly, and I think a large part of that is due to competition. Teams are also much more willing to pass on Oregon, though, and Oregon right now is allowing 30 more passing yards per game, and Ohio State has a 12.5 sack percentage, which is actually first nationally. I think a huge part of that is not just the fact their D-line is one of the nation's best. They also have freak athletes at linebacker, and their secondary is still very good. I think they do get a lot of coverage sacks in that regard. A lot of passes that last year would have just been incomplete passes against Ohio State's defense are now sacks, in my opinion. That's how I read it. You look at the trenches, I think Ohio State is better than Oregon because they have the better defensive line. I'd say a solidly better defensive line. Offensive line, I would slightly take Ohio State right now, but I have a feeling that Oregon's will be better in this game and in the future because they're finally healthy. But for now, I got to give Ohio State the edge in the trenches. Oregon's still very good there, though. Special teams, Oregon has shown an ability to return punts and kickoffs for touchdowns, and they do have a good kicker. So I will give them the edge over Ohio State. And you look at coaching here, head coach, got to give it to Ryan Day over Dan Lanning, and I think Ohio State defensively and in the strength and conditioning department is better than Oregon. I don't know what has happened in Ohio State's strength and conditioning room this season. Maybe it's the fact that they have played absolutely nobody, while in the past through the first 5 games they've typically played 1 or 2 competent opponents. Right now, they aren't suffering the same amount of injuries as they have in previous seasons, and their trench play is better. I think part of it may also be due to the fact that they returned a lot of more experienced players, but who knows? But so far, what I've seen, I'd give it to Ohio State in strength and conditioning. Offense is where I have a push for the coaching staff because I think Will Stein is one of the best OCs in the nation. I also think Chip Kelly is pretty darn good. I really do. But are we going to convince ourselves that the Iowa of this year, now knowing what they did against Ohio State with their offense, and Ohio State's defense this season is similar to last year's defense and personnel, are we going to seriously believe that Ohio State of last year wouldn't have also beaten this year's Iowa by 20-plus points? That was a misread by me thinking that Ohio State and Iowa would be competitive. It wasn't. I'm only saying that to say that Andy Kotelnicki and Will Stein, by their body of work versus Chip Kelly's over the previous few seasons, for example, would bear out that Will Stein and Andy Kotelnicki are better offensive coordinators. But Chip Kelly's done a very good job so far. I just have a push there because I'm fascinated to see what Chip Kelly will do against this Oregon defense and an Oregon team that is much better than Iowa. And it's the same thing with Will Stein. And Will Stein's best competition so far has honestly probably been Boise State or maybe Michigan State. I get to my prediction here, and I'm just going to keep this brief because I've already spent a lot of time, more time than I would like. I think Ohio State covers. I think they win. I think it's going to be 31-20 will be the score. I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State scores low 30s, high 20s, and holds Oregon to less than 20 points. That wouldn't shock me at all. Ohio State, something that I want to dive into more throughout this week. I pull a ton of statistics from teamrankings.com, a ton of them. a ton of them, like 146 of them. Out of 146 of those statistics, and there are other statistics that I can dive into that teamrankings.com doesn't provide, Ohio State leads in 109 of them out of 146. Ohio State is the far better team, I think, even when you adjust for the fact they've played a slightly weaker strength of schedule. They've also played the best team that either of these teams have played. I do think that Iowa, I don't know if this is exactly true because I've been very impressed with Boise State, but I think that Iowa is slightly better than Boise State. I do. And I think in part the reason why Boise State is power rated as a top 25 team or top 20 even by FPI right now is because thanks to Ashton Jeanty, they're able to effortlessly blow people out. And Iowa is, I think, more of a team than Boise State, who is a team, but is very much carried by, I think, one of the best, if not the best player in all of college football right now. So I think Ohio State covers. I think they win 31-20, cover that spread. Ryan Day gets a big win on the road. Oregon falls to 5-1, but the rest of their schedule looks light. Meanwhile, Ohio State has to play Penn State on the road, Nebraska at home, and that will be a tough 2-game stretch, as is Iowa and then Oregon back-to-back. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kind OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Jilton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the links in the description down below in the pinned comment. Have a great night, everyone. Go Ducks and go Buckeyes.